initiative has received a warm, positive and engaging response in past 2 days. Continuing the sequence with our enthusiastic audience, today our speaker would be taking up the topic of idea and practice of Indian temple architecture. During the past 2 days, our minds have been stimulated by diverse and alluring narratives on water around the theme of urban water heritage. Today, we would be diving deep into the idea of measured memory and constructed imagination of Indian temple architecture and associated practices. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to request Principal Professor Alka Tavri, ma'am, to say a few words regarding her vision for Samvad Shrinkala. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Avni. When we started this journey 4 years ago, last year, we did not have much idea about how will we traverse this path, but somehow we kept searching for the ideas which we can curate, and the idea generally comes from exploring the aspects of architecture which influence humans. In this time it has been spirituality. Last time it was water. Before that we explored the conservation also. But then somewhere we were continuously searching within us that what is it that affects each one of us? If not spirituality, what? How do we connect architecture with spirituality? How do we look at our rivers? How do we look at our religions, our so-called mythology, and so-called folklores? So the first Samvad was on waterscapes of Maharashtra, and we went through some beautiful waterscapes. Yesterday was an ideation on bridge, which is land of Krishna and Yamuna, and there was some beautiful narrative that we went through. And today I'm dead sure about Professor Jayachandran that this journey will be the most wonderful journey, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing you, sir. We know that a person should not be monodimensional. You should have varied interest. Looking at him, a person who comes from IT background, who Avani ma'am will give the detailed description, but a person who comes from IT background yet deals with classical dance form, and also a deep researcher into Indian thoughts. So welcome Jayachandran sir, and I'm looking forward to hearing you. Thanks a lot. A warm welcome to everyone else also for joining today. Hope you had a nice journey, and today is the culmination of this Samvad Shrinkala, but we'll keep meeting again and again. So back to you, Avni. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your thoughts with us. I would now like to introduce our speaker. Professor Jayachandran is a practitioner of dance who works on formal nature of art. He is a lecturer at Center for Exact Humanities, IIIT Hyderabad. With an electronics engineering background, Professor Jayachandran started his career as software engineer with Wipro. He joined Kalakshetra Foundation as a part of research and documentation department, later served as assistant professor at Kalakshetra. Professor Jayachandran started Bharatanatyam training under Srimati Meera Narayanan and Sri Gopinathan. Later, his dancing skills were refined by Srimati Leela Sampson, Professor C.V. Chandrasekhar and Srimati Jaya Chandrasekhar and Srimati Pragha Bisal. Professor Jayachandran did Diploma in Saiva Siddhanta, BA History, MA Philosophy and MA in Bharatanatyam. He has researched significantly on the temples of Tiruvarur and Chidambaram and has presented papers on the same. His paper, Tiruvarur Sthalam, as interpreted in Srimati Rukmini Devi's choreography, has won him the Best Lecture Demonstration Award from the Music Academy. His paper on architecture and choreography, a comparative analysis, has been featured in the website www.shabda.co.in. He was featured in the Silent Burns Project, #AKC20, a video in celebration of 20 years of Akram Khan Dance Academy. As a performer, Professor Jayachandran has done many solo shows. He has conducted workshops and trainings, and he continues to research, write papers, and teach and lecture on subjects of his interest. Before I request our speaker to begin the session, I would like to once again inform our participants that they can put up their questions in the live chat window of YouTube, Facebook, and question answer section of MST. Depending on time availability, we shall be requesting our speaker to address as many questions possible at the end of the session. Now, without any further ado, I welcome Professor Jayachandran to present his work. Over to you, sir.
Namaste. Nandi Arulali, Nadanam Pervetro. Nandi Arulali, Molanai Nadino. Nandi Arulavadi Ensayum Natinil, Nandi Vadigatta Nanirindi. Namaskaram. I welcome you all for this afternoon's presentation on the measured memory and constructed imagination, the idea and practice of Indian temple architecture. In the first place, my pranams to Alkaji, who has conceived, thought, and implemented the work of this webinar, which kind of has multi-dimension to it, and it has invited many thinkers and speakers to express their thought. On another note, I feel privileged to be part of this webinar so that a kind of a samvad can happen, a knowledge exchange can happen. Before starting the entire lecture, it is important that many of us understand that the idea of any work has many giants who have contributed their life and work. As Isaac Newton would say, I'm standing on the shoulders of the giants. Perhaps I didn't do anything new. I only pushed a part of it, and the world is celebrating the work. Even most of us, before discussing what is Indian architecture, it is so important to acknowledge the great giants, the great contributors, the great thinkers and sage seers, authors of this particular stream of knowledge system called architecture in India. They were called as Vishwakarmans. A great clan of thinker practitioners. Thinking and practicing in modern terms is called praxis. It is so much so a day-to-day life for these people, the Vishwakarmans. I would wish to pay my obeisance to all the great Sthapatis, the Acharyas who have built the magnificent works which are the products which we are seeing currently. My prayers to Rajaraja Kunjara Perintachan, whose constructional work is none other than the Rajarajeshwaram, also known as the Brihadeshwara Temple of Tanjavur. My obeisance to Akalanka Acharya and his father, who has built in the Pudukkottai district of Tamil Nadu in Kadambarmalai, the great temples there. My special privilege of paying my obeisance to Sarvasiddhi Acharya and Kunda Tribhuvan Acharya, who have built Virupaksha temple and 12 other temples in the pressings of Pattadakal, the Chalukyan constructions. My head-bound namaskarams to Mallitamma Acharya, who has built the temple in Somnathpura, the Hoysala architecture. My special prayers to Asiri Veerappa Acharya, who has built the Brihadeshwara temple in part of Tamil Nadu, and many great saint architects. I would wish to call them saint architects, because the way architecture has been built and conceived is more a way of a meditator and a practitioner, a sadhaka, and more than a sadhaka. At least a sadhaka has a sadhana to do. To me, they are upasakas. The distinction between sadhaka and an upasaka is that at least sadhaka's thing has a goal to complete their work. It has a material ending. While for upasakas, the entity, what they are doing is a living entity. It lives with them. They don't seek advantage, or they don't seek any benefit. There is no utilitarian value or instrumental value of what they are doing. They don't seek anything like that. It's like living with our own parents, with our own family members. We have to feed them. We have to be friendly with them. We have to, though we may have difference of opinion, we live with them. And with a lot of love and care, we extend our lineage to them, to these people who we reverentially call as Vishwakarman. For them, temple and temple building is a upasana. It's not just a sadhana. For them, they are living entities. At times, this profession has not even given anything in return to them. Even the most difficult times, they have, with great determination and grit, they have offered their services. They have kept them alive. We would see that. My prayers to all the great saint architects of the Chola dynasty, Kadamba dynasty, Satavahanas, Pallavas, Pandyas, and name any dynasty, Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas, anyone we know, to all the saint architects. And in the modern sense of the term, special obeisance to Ananda Kentish Kumaraswamy, whose writings has opened a dialogue, a samvada between the Eastern world and the Western world on Indian architecture. And another great giant is Ernest Brinfield Havel, or E.B. Havel, as is called, commonly known as. My respects to my teachers, Sri Umapati Acharya and Sri Veeranathan Acharya, who have, whatever little I know, I've understood, are from these two giants who live in Kumbakonam, Tamil Nadu. Respects and maryadas to their ancestors, to their grandfather Shilpa Samrat Brahmashri K. Vayyapuri Acharya, and their father Shilpa Chintamani Acharya in Punjab. Having paid respects to the entire lineage, I wish to venture into the thought. It is interesting to understand that their entire work revolves around constructing the temples. But even in spirit, how did they conceive it? What is that it takes them to do it? Can we go to the next slide, please? The Vishwakarma, the Lord Vishwakarma, he is the deity of this entire traditional scholars who have been speaking about. We have to understand that architecture, whatever we see as architecture currently, is a finished product. It's a product, but much of the ideas are still in the mind of the thinkers. Much of it is still fostering, still culminating, it's still taking a shape. It is for any creator, there is a process of creation, then there's a bubble which opens up from the thinking pot of their mind. A man tends to think from his creative source. As and when he or she is thinking, a bubble opens up. So much of activity happens within this creative bubble, out of which very extremely less amount of it materializes into a material form. That's called the material end. While this bubble is what is called as kalpa. It has infinite time within it. And there is an extension to it. That's why it's called kalpana, imagination. Finally, it takes a material shape, which is the material end to this bubble. For example, I would give a parallel, like a painter wishes to do a painting. Before putting a stroke on the canvas, so much of thinking happens, so much of thinking goes, turmoil happens in the mind. But ultimately, it boils down to one stroke. It is also the case of a writer. So much of writing, the thinking happens. And when that is finally put into a sentence, I mean, most of us know it's only 1/10 of it. This is called the sesha, or the leftover of this bubble. People like the great acharyas of the Vishwakarma tradition, they are masters of this kalpa, kalpana, and the sesha. And the deity they are praying is Lord Vishwakarma. He himself is the first stroke man, if you wish to call. Because this image making, this particular bubble is called the image. The process of image making is called imagination. It's a constructed imagination. But that is fostered by a source of a battery charge called the memory. That has to be measured first, then the imagination unfolds. This we would see. This is the main crux of the lecture today. We would see it in two parts: the measured memory and the constructed imagination. Let us get into it. Next slide, please. This is the finest, one of the finest architectures of India. We see a constructed, completed architecture here called as Tanjavur Surat Temple. We know it has so many great credentials to it, but something very innately available within it is its measure. It has a measure so specific to it. To be very honest, Chidambaram as a temple has its own measure called Chidambara Muram. Muram is a measure. Or mana. Mana, the word mana comes from the root ma, which means to measure. Ultimately, ma or motherhood is about certain kinds of measure, a qualitative measure and a quantitative measure. That is called motherhood. And that is equal. Interestingly, in this culture, ma is the same root for Mahalakshmi, Lakshmi, measure, and mother. All of them are focused on something called qualitative and quantitative measures. Even the word mana or respect is a kind of a qualitative and a quantitative measure with respect to the society. That's why it's called mana, manini. Why am I quoting this? That there is a kind of a measure which has multiplied itself to see an architecture like this. Where does this come from? Where does this memory come from? Where does this measure come from? So let us explore it. Next slide, please. Yeah. In principle, any being here is a measurer. Actually, by virtue of our existence, by our virtue of our coming to existence, from being, we become, there's a becoming. So while the phase of becoming, how do we become something is by measuring. We are measuring entities. We start ticking. They say the moment the male principle and the female progenitive principle come together, the moment a life is formed, it starts counting. When the count crosses 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 6 or 10 to the power of million counts. In counting, the process of counting starts. I'm repeating it. The moment the zygote is born, the moment an organism is born, it starts counting. The count starts by pulses. When the pulse rate crosses after the first pulse, second pulse, third pulse, fourth pulse, and the pulse goes on and on over time. And when it crosses the count of 10 to the power of million, there is no more addition. Any number beyond 10 to the power of million, addition ceases or fails to function. There is no distinction between x and x plus 1. When this number is raised to the power of 10, that is 10 to the power of 10 to the power of million, this entity multiplication ceases in the number line. There is no distinction between x and 2x. Remember, we have to understand still measure is going on. We are breathing, that particular pulsating entity is breathing and slowly breathing. After so many breaths, by count I mean by breath, after so many breaths, it has crossed 10 to the power of 10 to the power of million. There is nothing called multiplication in life. Furthermore, breathing leads that when 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of million, there is no distinction between x and x squared. Exponentiation ceases. And furthermore, any breath after that, the counting of the breath, it gets into a phase called that number. When such a huge finite number, it fails to count. Mind starts fail to count. That first phase, the junction between huge numbering, as and when it keeps increasing, as in when we are increasing our breath, our count of breath, this entire exercise is converted into something called sound, and that breath is called ah. That is the first sound. Practically, it is a number. Ah, as an akshara, as an alphabet, as a sound comes, basically so many count has already got exhausted before the sound or a sound is uttered. Mind has already crossed so many counts, but all these are hardwired in our memory. All this count has been hardwired in our memory. Even to think like a human being, we have crossed so many aeons of thinking. This nervous system has gone so much of evolution, so much of transformation, that it has, in principle, it has hosted a fish in it, it has hosted a crab, it has hosted a snake, it has hosted all the unicellular to the multicellular being in it. It has crossed all that as a measure. Counts have crossed. Every of this has been embedded in our memory. After crossing so much of memory frames, a first sound is born. That is called akara, a. From that sound, furthermore, counting goes to create another ukara. All the vowels are born out of it. So basically, numbers, and from the numbers, vowels and consonants are born. Basically, in Vishwakarma tradition, still there is a way to convert any idea in principle into a number. They convert a huge abstract idea into a number. For them, number is worshipable. Sacred geometry, sacred numbers, these form the reality out. Any reality here can be represented as coordinates of numbers. Modern physics agrees with this, and this is an ancient, very, very ancient system. Only these particular consecutive measures, I repeat myself, as a being, we start breathing, and as breathing is nothing but counting for us. As and when we start breathing and breathing and breathing, we cross certain number of breath, and after that, the consolidated breath is called akara. And in principle, it builds into other sounds also. And from the sounds of alphabets, words are born. And from the words, meanings are born. And from the meaning, the world is born. So from the number, alphabets to words, words to meaning, meaning to the world. But interestingly, number also denotes parallelly, as in when we are parallelly co-mapping. every transition here is also a number here, from an alphabet to a word to a meaning, meaning to the world. Everything can be notated as numerical values. As such huge numerical values, the Vishwakarman people, the Vishwakarmas, they kind of consolidate as ayadi numbers. And they make a ganita out of it. They make a mathematics, they make a measure, and they approximate into certain measurements. One of an interesting thing is, for them, what is so seemingly chaotic has a formation within it. They get into deeper dhyana, and they kind of settle the seemingly chaotic. For a naked eye, everything is chaotic. They get into deeper dhyana, they settle the chaos, seemingly chaotic space, and they settle everything there. While settling slowly, the chaotic arrangement arranges itself to make a formation. From that formation, an information is revealed. This is what they take as an input, that information from the chaos. From this particular measure, they slowly expand it into constructed structures. For them, that ordering is called rhythm. Ordering is rhythm. For them, order is satyam. Rhythm, satyam. The entire cosmos is made of many principles. But according to Vishwakarma tradition, according to architectural tradition, the entire cosmos is made up of an abstract entity called numbers, the multiplication factor of numbers. Then they construct, and in principle, they also feel it can be ordered. The numbers can be ordered to create a construction. Basically, any architecture is an arrangement. We generally tend to speak about architecture as space and time. Yes, of course. But there is something far more interesting. That measure, that number, that particular measuring rod, as and when they keep counting, they arrive upon some measure. That measure, that particular unit they call as danda. What is the role of a danda? What is the role of a measure? It marries two different worlds, of irrational to the rational world. Seemingly irrational world to the rational world. In between, there's a danda. The danda rationalizes the irrational. Seemingly irrational, they get rationalized. Irrational, how do we, what is irrational? Irrational world of imagination. Irrational is a world of gods, as we wish to say. To be very honest, they are entities who are not just radical, they are radical entities. Irrationals are radical entities whose behavior we can't actually fathom. They are not just radical, they are also surgical. What is surgical here? Surds are those entities. It's a Persian word, surd. Surd means one who's deaf, or one who turns a deaf ear. They will not listen to anyone. It is so interesting to understand whatever the divine beyond human existence we are trying to down manifest here as architectural constructions. Ideas are also very abstract. They are beyond our thought. They are surgical, they are radical, they are irrationals. We want to convert them into something called a rational entity, or on a very confined enclosures. We want to actually arrest them. What is the method we have to do to convert an irrational idea into a rational entity? We have to have a danda, or a ratio and proportion. We need to have a measure. Without measure, this conversion cannot happen. And that measure is something from already existing memories, hardwired memories of human existence. I repeat myself that if there is a need to construct a work of art, primarily, idea has to be converted into a finished product of art. It could be work of art, it could be architecture, it could be dance, music, but an idea in principle has to be converted. The realm of idea is what I mean by the irrationals. They are independent entities. They are beings. Ideas are beings. Ideas are denuded, bodiless beings. Ideas have careers. Ideas have their own careers. They want to get into someone's body, they want to have a growth, and they want to leave the body and also have their own other career. So ideas are hanging around everywhere. They are denuded beings. But they are waiting for someone to take a hand, to take a leg, to take a body. These ideas are called as divine entities. The moment the artists or the architects find the proper measure from their own image-making capacity, the idea transforms itself, the irrational idea transforms itself into a rational work of art. This danda in between, the measuring rod in between, varies from place to place. In human body, it is called the spine. The spinal cord is the danda. It is the connection between the realm of thinking, thought, and realm of action. It's a connection between the realm of memory and the realm of imagination and action furthermore. In architectural parlance, next slide, please. In architectural parlance, this particular idea of danda is represented by a pillar, a stambha, a vertical pillar. Wherever we see in architecture a vertical pillar, an indirect thing is the representation of a vertical column of light, a measured light. Next slide. The vertical column of light, wherever we see, we have to understand it as columns of lights. They are not just stone pillars. One interesting thing is a pillar, a danda, an extended danda. It's called skampa, also called as skampa, also called as yupa, also called as pada, also called as angri. The pillar, the stamba, connects heaven to earth. In other words, it connects the realm of irrational to the rationals. Or in other terms, it connects the world of people who don't listen, the people who we kind of request them to listen, or the unmanifest to the manifest. Now, in another way, it is also represented as it is a world which connects the world of circle to the world of square. Heavens are represented by circles, and earth is represented by a square. This is called squaring the circle problem. It's impossible to square a circle. It's one of the problems of irrationals, and it has been stated by Ferdinand von Lindemann in 1882, that it's an irrational problem. We can Google Ferdinand von Lindemann in 1882 problem. So you would get this particular problem that he states that it is impossible to square a circle exactly. That if we take a circle to find an exact equivalent surface area of a square, to make a square whose surface area is exactly same is impossible. For this, one has to identify the idea of measure, the idea of danda. That danda can transform. Only danda, a measuring rod, to approximations can transform an idea from the heaven into the earth to make something tangible. Having said that, even to say that even ancient Indian sciences, they have dealt with this problem. And one of the texts which speaks here about this transforming something which is abstract into extremely mundane measures or tangible measures. Baudhayana, Shulba Sutras, the entire sect of Shulba Sutra deals with this. Shulba means rope. With a rope measure, they have resolved many, many irrational problems. I mean, Shulba Sutra becomes one of the major inputs to science of architecture. In fact, Indian Shulba Sutra, Baudhayanas, Apastamba Shulba Sutra, there are many Shulba Sutras texts are there. They give us an idea how to convert a completely imaginative idea into a tangible material. For instance, they also they reveal some very interesting facets. That argument's sake, they make a statement that if you draw a line on a plane, on a surface, only fools see a line, but the informed see a potential plane. A line has a hidden plane in it. When we draw a line on a sheet of paper while we're constructing, we have an idea and we are converting into an architectural structure. The lines the lines hide the planes in it. When there's a potential opening of those lines, planes are exposed. And planes are entities potentially which host three-dimensional entities in it. Everything is folded within. All these things are called imagination. So there is a measured memory earlier. That measured memory is nothing but the stamba, the yupa, also called as danda, the measures which are converting something irrational to rational. But as and when we are converting it, the image opens up. It opens up into furthermore images. Here it is, every stroke we make, there is a tendency to open up into higher bubbles of imagination out of it. I re-quote the first example, what I said, that as and when we are thinking, it opens up into a bubble. It opens up into a bubble. And finally, one stroke or one patch is drawn on a canvas, or one move is done by a dancer, or one kind of an architectural design is made by an architect. Ultimately, it is hardwired memory in one's existence, which is getting transformed into this. I have to say, all these particular technical expansion is not just so theoretical and so dry, but they are made into beautiful sculptures and architecture. But not many of us are aware that much of inquiry and detailing has gone into it, that every nuance we take into it, a great idea is getting converted into a shape there. Like most of us know in Tanta paintings of Tibet, the idea of peace is getting converted to the image of Buddha. What an abstraction. Next slide, please. We would see how such precise measure has led us into cut in a mountain to create a precise temple there, because it is not just by calculated measures, but extremely subtle understanding of memory and imagination in work. Some cut-in works of humanly impossible scale can happen. How is this particular wonder called Kailasanatha Temple of Ellora is possible? Because the tradition teaches us the technique of transforming and embedding or understanding a structure within a potential material. This particular science called the Stapatya, or the Shastras or the Stapatis, the Vishwakarma Shastra, the Shilpa Shastra tradition, they have their roots in Vedas. For them, a temple is a visual commentary of a Veda. To write textual commentary is fine, but to write a visual commentary, temples and architectural structures are visual commentaries of the Veda. Interestingly, furthermore, to add on, it is so important that the entire Vishwakarma tradition, the way of constructing a temple is not about only constructing in physical material need. It's not just only about the technical training. Of course, they are great people in technique. There is no doubt about it. But much of the training happens in secrecy. There's a culturing. There's a kind of knowledge transfer happens from generations to generations. The way they transfer their knowledge from one generation to the other is, we also know that during certain historical misgiving period, I would call this as a darker period in the history of Indian architecture, that many of the Vishwakarma people were not allowed to construct temples for few centuries, close to a century and a half, or more than that, in certain places of India. But how did, after when the particular invasion has happened, after so many years of non-construction of a temple, suddenly the temples have cropped up back, the same places. If there is no practice for them for 150 years, how did it crop up back? Because the knowledge of construction is not just transferred as a training with a chisel and a hammer, or kind of a technological training, but much of the training has happened intellectually, what I've been speaking about. How is an idea getting converted into a number? How to convert a number into a shape? What are the measuring methods? How is memory getting converted into a shape? These are the discussions and deeper discussion in the Shilpa Shastra. In fact, during this process, many of the works, many of the sensitive inputs have been borrowed into the work of architecture. Architecture, we know, it is actually, it's like making or hosting light in it. The spirit of it is hosting light. Within space and time, we are hosting light. Many structures there are representation of illumined beings. Pillars are direct examples of light traveling towards the heaven. It has fire in its base. While as it travels towards the vertical heavens, it is actually building all of us into another realm. It is taking all of us into another realm. It is trying to pull us into another realm. In fact, anyone who is inside a temple are also considered to be part of the temple. The moment we are out of the temple, we are on ourselves. The moment we are inside the temple, we are part of the temple. We are the temple. We become one among the architectural structure. Only the difference is we are moving entities, and some of them parts are non-moving entities. Temples are also constructed, in a sense, when it comes to its imagination part. How did they imagine that even one temple constructed there, they have taken into consideration of all the people who are walking inside? Even for 5,000 years from now, if people are walking inside the temple, even their jatakas have been predicted and calculated. And temples are also designed so that it will bestow goodness to them. Much of these calculations happen within the temple, and the Shilpa Shastra speaks about these calculations of converting such communal good harmony into structures. In fact, to speak that this conversion part of an imagination into a realized structure from the memory, it is getting converted into a constructed physical structure. It is also important to understand It is the representation of the cosmos in a micro abode. It is a representation of our ancestral thinking. The moment I see a sanctum sanctorum, it is not just the God alone, the representation of the Godhead there in the Mula Murti. It's a Prakriti form of it. When I'm worshipping it, I'm worshipping all the thinkers of the land, all the thinkers of the world together. Their contribution, their goodnesses, everything is transformed into an icon, into a structure. Can I go to the next slide, please? When we see a temple like Madurai Meenakshi Temple, we know this structure itself is born out of a huge legacy of a great society's existence. Temple generally leads to a societal existence there. Artistic society lives around a temple and its life. They breathe art with each other, because in given temple there are so many professions which come together to make a temple as a life. The artistic society, some of them are weavers, potters, jewel makers, painters, to the greatest of the scholars, the doctors, to the barbers, even to the there are many people who are part of the temple as a profession, or dependent on the temple. While the Vishwakarmans are asked to construct, or being obliged to themselves, they have obliged themselves to construct an architecture which will host all these activities together, not just as physical rooms, but in spirit. They know in this particular mandapa, the congregation of painters can happen. In this mandapa, the congregation of doctors can happen. Even that particular principle is being extended into the architecture there. In terms of their measures, in terms of the ratios, they have extended it. And there are specific mandapas and sabhas being constructed for their congregations. Because we also know temples were kind of sabhas, they were congregations, they were also university centers of learning. It would be a great challenge to reinvent such a robust imagination system and a measuring system like this. I have to say that temple, in its Indian temple architecture, in its principle, it has a heritage of thinking. It has a culture where it is recreating something which is not there, because the very word of culture means recreating from nature. Nature is Prakriti, culture is Sanskriti, and temple falls into the activity of Sanskriti. It has to recreate nature into it, not imitate it. And it is constructed into an architectural structure there. Most importantly, it has an inherited knowledge system in its architecture, and extremely profound calculations called Ayadi Ganita. For them, the constructed architecture is the space where the great divine forces come and stay. The gods, the Purusha, he manifests, he gives his energy into a Prakriti form. The Prakriti form is nothing but the constructed temple. When the temple is constructed, the Vishwakarmans who constructed it, along with the Karta who has ordained this temple, they do the Kumbhabhishekam for it, the consecration process. During the consecration process, the holy water is poured on the top of the temple, but not to the Mula Murti. In that sense, the architecture itself is worshipable, not necessarily the icon in the Sanctum Sanctorum. The architecture is sacred. We are so much in debt for this group of Vishwakarma people who have constructed the legacy of them, who had this great idea of transforming the memory into a measure, And through that measure, they create an imagination. And through that imagination, some architectural principles, architectural constructions have happened. Praying to such illumined beings, to their practice of construction, to their practice, their practice of perception, their practice, their upasana of memory, the Vishwakarma's upasana of imagination, and Vishwakarma people's upasana of action has been extremely alleviating, extremely, I would rather say, it's very difficult, because the kind of knowledge one is required to acquire to do this work is completely abstract, is very abstract. It is not something very tangible. It's completely intangible conversion of a great idea getting down manifested into something structural beings. Having said this, I take a leap that such a kind of Shastra has been inherited and called as Shilpa Shastra, and it is not the Agama which they follow. They follow the Shilpa Shastra. And to such Vishwakarmans who have given us these temples, who have given us a path to convert or measure the memory and convert it into an imaginative architecture, to such Vishwakarmans, I place my obeisance, I place my bow to them, and I end this lecture. I thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for such a fascinating and thought-provoking session. I'm sure, and many would agree, that your narratives on Indian temple architecture have helped us to connect with our roots and rich heritage with a distinct perspective. It is indeed the need of hour to preserve, conserve, and pass on this traditional wisdom to the future generations. The participants have shared many questions and observations, which we would like to request you to kindly address. Sir, should we start the question answer session?
Yes, please.
Okay, sir. So our first question is by student Isha Sarvi. This presentation and the points you discussed had most of us making so many connections. Some we knew and some we didn't. Thank you so much for opening these doors for us. Could you please provide us resource material, books or articles that would help us understand these transitions of ideas across various domains?
Interestingly, these measures in which how to transform an idea into a physical work of art, there is no one kind, but most of them we think they are poetries. Argument's sake, for an example, I would recommend an explanation, something, but given in the the direct reference, I would say Shulba Sutra of Baudhayana, but there are texts and translations of it. But I would rather tell much of this technique of transformation from the idea into practice is available only among practitioners, because they would wish to, the way we read a text is not from a direct Sanskrit translation, but we need experts to interpret those words, those technical words. Argument's sake, when we interpret in Sanskrit the word suchi, if you get a term like suchi, argument's sake, it means a pointer which starts from the center and extends itself to outside. But in the technical context of the Vishwakarma tradition, the word suchi, or suchi is read as suchi, it means pointing in. It's just the opposite. So it's best to read the technical texts under experts, and they would give us these techniques of transforming in practice and also in theory, how to transform it. And it is not available in books. A sketchy way of understanding is available in books, but not thoroughly though.
Okay, thank you, sir. Question 2 is from our faculty, Professor Mrunmayee Gauri. Thank you, sir, for such amazing presentation. You practice performing art of Bharatnatyam. Can you please elaborate if there are any connection between figurative calculations of Sthapatya Shastra and traditional dance forms?
A theater, see, I had to say this. Natya or theater is architecture spread over time, while architecture is Natya frozen over space. I have to give another example because there are many features here. Everything is measured. If I want to get into details, it's another separate discussion, but I'll give you certain sketches. Music over time, I should say, that's a painting over time becomes music. Music confined within a space is painting. Not many of us know terminologies in painting like raga. The word raga means color, and tala means measure. Temporal and spatial measure. Both are called tala. Tala in terms of time, in terms of space, it is also called as tala. But interestingly, what is so important about painting and music? In a painting, the exteriors are stagnant, but the interiors are constantly in motion. Interiors of our paintings are constantly moving. When we see a painting, we understand different people understand different content from it because the interiors are moving. The same thing happens in music. Exteriorly set music, it is stagnant, but the interiors are constantly in movement in the music. That's why we get different emotions within it. All these things are possible, and even in terms of architecture and sculpture. Sorry, I would rather use the word sculpture and dance. Sculpture over time becomes dance. And dance frozen on a given instance becomes a sculpture. By sculpture, I don't not necessarily mean dancing sculpture. Any sculpture, a sculpture of, I have to say this, that especially in Sthapati's tradition, they would say, it is not an optical lotus, it's a cognitive lotus. The lotus is drawn, the Padma is handling, wherever it's hanging around. This is not an optical, there is no realism being there. That lotus does not represent a real lotus in the nature. But when the moment you see this lotus and that the lotus in the nature, we have a cognitive imprint on each other, not an optical imprint. This is so important, how to arrive upon looking at something which is seemingly completely different, but have a cognition of that other natural image. This is what I'm seeing. I'm speaking about measured memory. Memory in us triggers certain points in our cognition so that we get recollected to a lotus in the real life. But actually, there's nothing to do with lotus there. It is a completely different stylized version. This is what requires a very deeper understanding how to convert something very optical there in the real life into a cognitive material. That material, that cognitive representation needs measuring and ratio and proportion and putting it into rationals. That is what they call as converting an irrational into a rational entity. A surgical entity, a rational entity into an artistic material. Anyway, in that sense, dance and architecture they are all based on this conversion of irrational idea getting represented into rational. There is no difference. I mean, there is absolutely no difference in the way of perception, in the methods of memory, in the methods of imagination. Only thing in which all the art form differs is the method of action. Only when we go to our respective studios, we are different in our work. In the cognitive level, all of us are same. And we are no way any different from any physics or a mathematician or a biologist. All of us, our perceptions, our memories and imaginations are all same.
Thank you,
I hope
sir.
I answered.
Yes, thank you, sir. Next question is from a student, Darshan Wagmare. You mentioned sacred geometry has an associated number. Sacred geometry is observed is observed not only in Indian temples but many buildings across different religions across the globe, in Islam, in Judaism, Christianity, etc. Do you believe that the form came first and simultaneously, or the theory?
First of all, to associate any sectarian thinking and a religion to a structure itself puts us a lot of block in thinking. I can very easily say that I don't know how many of us have visited any traditional dargahs of Kerala. There is no distinction in structure. It looks like a typical traditional house of Kerala. And there are older churches in certain parts of India, very, very ancient. There is no distinction. The factor is, it is not the structure which is religious. The makers can be actually, I have to say a very important thing. People we say as Buddha architecture, Jaina architecture, Hindu architecture. But how many of us know all people who did all these three architectures come from the same community called Vishwakarmas? There is no Jain Vishwakarma, there is no Buddha Vishwakarma, there is no Hindu Vishwakarma. Vishwakarma is common, and they have done all these work. Ultimately, the idea is same. There is no if you boil down to the ideational level, the idea which they represent is absolutely same. Still, I repeat myself, in the realm of memory, in the realm of perception, in the realm of imagination, all the architects across the globe and all the artists are same. In one. Number two, when you ask which comes first, theory, or in principle, all of us are theoretical beings. In principle, a human is a theoretical being. It is so difficult to comprehend this. Generally, we say practice comes first, from then theory comes. But how many of us also know, by the virtue of we being a human, we are a grammar. Only in this grammar, this is called human. If the grammar changes, we are another being. Fundamentally, we being a human itself, and the way we are cognitively thinking, this is a grammar of thinking. A way of grammarized thinking. Only that way of thinking is called as human thinking. If there is an alteration here and there in cognition, we are called another sensory being. Fundamentally, even in the geometrical structure arrangement, there is a theoretical base to it. We all of us know the word theory. Theo means God. Theo means divine, not necessarily God, it means divine. The divine revelation is called theory. So if there are seeds of imagination, in principle, we are theoretical being. Divine, patterned, sacredly patterned, cognitive, imaginative, memorized beings. Then there is no distinction. Henceforth, any of our actions are first theoretical, hence becomes practical. In this way, we look first the Veda, then the world. The word Veda here not necessarily means the Rigya, Yajur, Sama, Atharva. I'm referring to some kind of theoretical base in which the entire cosmos is getting ordained itself. There is an ordinance. From there, actually speaking, there's already an ordinance there. Only we humans find it confusing. It's our perception, it's our inability to identify which is theory and which is practice. It's still the kind of our inability to delve into the darkness of the knowledge. Still, there is a confusion there. Which came first? Anyway, this is my opinion that we are theoretical beings, and from there practice comes.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Next question is from our faculty, Pooja Shaha. So thank you for sharing these notes on the transition of an idea. It was fascinating when you spoke of the stamba as a measuring rod, and especially the spine becoming the realm of thought or measured memory. Can these memories lead to a varied constructed imaginations?
Absolutely. You answered it. It is. In the sense, See, what is imagination is nothing but image making. What is image means? It's not always visual. There are majorly 5 types of images. There are auditory images, there are visual images, there are olfactory images. They are nasal. It's like even through smell you have images, even through touch you have images. I mean, man in its cognition, we have all of images. Basically, sensory organs create images. Anything we are cognizing, we are trying to make a summum bonum of all the image put together and make it. But most of us know this is coming to practice only because of the existence of spine, existence of something called the sensory organs, and the action there where the thought, which is in the mind, is getting converted in some kind of action through the sensory organs. By the word spine, I not necessarily mean just the spinal cord, but the entire action of the central nervous system, which is by imagination, which is, our action. Everything is connected to it. Yes, of course, you answered it.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Next question is from our faculty, Professor Nisha Kundar Venkateshwar. I'm reminded of Muthuswami Dikshita's story of his kritis being inspired by the Meenakshi Amman and many other temples. In one lifetime, they created over 2 lakh kritis. Musical art inspired by architecture, modern architects being obsessed with wanting to build and build in their limited capacities, and knowledge. Would you think we can arrive at reconstructing the knowledge systems or shastras? What could be the starting point?
We are already in the work. We are not anywhere left behind. I mean, there are, in any given time, I would not, there is a given thing that even in yesteryears, there were people who were doing it for the sake of doing, and some people involved into this particular kind of deeper investigations of what is happening. I mean, rationalized and want to know what is happening kind of people. In any given phase of the world, people were like that. Both were there, judiciously there. What is the current, perhaps what is the problem of the modern era is the, the silencing or the numbing of the senses, the numbing of imagination. I mean, it is today, we are imagination starved. In one way you look at it, because for us, anything imaginative should be big. I mean, anything we are thinking more, we have to say it loud. I mean, today's even love is supposed to be called as, public display of love. I mean, public display of affection or whatever they call this. This is an imagination starved status. If India is poor, it is not poor by economy, it is poor by imagination. If we build our imagination further, because the kind of imagination we had of yesteryears, that's a very fantastic imagination. I mean, it has a lot of fantasies in it. Fantastic, phantasma, phantom. There is a presence of phantom in it. By phantom, I don't mean a kind of a spirit or something like that. I mean, what kind of imagination even would lead us in principle to build a Meenakshi temple? I'm not saying exact Meenakshi, in principle. Well, there is no other visible structure anywhere near to the temple which can be even more than first floor. There is not even any imagination nearby close by for a reference. I mean, how would you construct, even for that matter, Sanchi Stupa, where the smallest dwelling, anything nearby is only a small huttish or a first floor, ground floor basement structure. Nothing visually available anywhere for a reference. It's one off. And one off, that imagination takes so much of years of thinking. It is not one man's thinking. Yes, it is one man's dhyana, but it takes so much of sustained industrial thinking. I mean, I don't think modern people have a belief that imagination can also be industrial. By the word industrial, I mean that half of the imagination my father can do, next half of the imagination the son can do, and the third part of the imagination the next generation can do. For us, imagination is very selfish. My imagination. We are very in a work of art today. Art has become so individualistic today. We draw a work and we finally put a signature on it and feel this is my work. And we write a poetry, you say, this is my poetry. It's all fine. But yesteryear's a huge fresco is done by so many generations of people. And there is no signature, idea of signature even. To be very honest, there could be some inscriptions which give their names. What is so important about here is there is far more a deeper thinking of imagination, that the work is actually not done by me. There is some image underlying a continuous thread of imagination just probing us to do this. And such kind of grander imagination, perhaps we are starved. But I don't think it is impossible to get back to this imagination. We all have to strive to do it, nothing else.
Yes, thank you, sir. Our next question is from student Anirudh. The explanation of the connection of rational and irrational world using Danda, realm of ideas, was wonderful. Danda being the spine in human body, I would like to know how else is Danda, not being an abstract form, is lively just like in the human body? Is it lively somewhere else?
Of course, yeah. See, Danda, if not for spine of a human body, word is a Danda. I mean, spoken word is an approximation between the word of irrational and the assumed meaning. I mean, if I say a word, I mean, I say lotus. This LOTUS is not there in the particular in the flower. There is no L, there is no O, there is no T, there is no U, there is no S. But I'm connecting to the cognitive memory of what I'm carrying it for millions of years of looking at a lotus. A word is another Danda. I mean, for that matter, any work of art is a Danda. If I even do some measures, small strokes, number is a Danda, word is a Danda. Yeah, even if I put a stroke on a canvas, the first stroke is a Danda. First stroke. I mean, all of us know the first stroke is the difficult thing, even in architecture. When you're designing something, the first start, the cue, the spark, that is a Danda. From there, we start measuring everything else. I mean, we can keep on doing some designs here and there. And nowadays, we don't even use drafters and all. And the designing happens on the soft material, I mean, on the screen. Absolutely fine. But as and when we're doing and doing, till we get a spark, they are mere lines. They are mere curves. They are mere nothing. The moment a spark is born, that becomes the measuring Danda for the entire structure to be recasted. And that is what we call as Danda. Danda is that particular talking between the irrational world and the rational world. Till then, it is completely disorganized and confused. The moment that Danda falls in place, then everything opens up. The entire problem solves itself. And that is Danda. Yeah.
Thank you. Our last question is from student Sanskar Jadhav. Vishwakarma's contribution to temples and architecture shows that they had Sulabh Sutras and they must have been using those in day-to-day practice. Point to notice here, scripts were not limited to not only Kshatriya and Brahmin, but also to everyone. We are not teaching that to students of architecture, but do these artisans use it nowadays also?
Yes, of course, yes. They do it even now. I mean, texts are not relegated only to Kshatriyas and Brahmins. It's a kind of a gross approximation. No, it is not. So kind of you, hearty and happy that this particular person has highlighted the statement. Very happy to know that it has been cognized. Texts are various varieties, and there are many other texts, and not everything only restricted to Brahminical and Kshatriya kind of associations. There are many other texts. There are so many other streams of knowledge and stream. See, and another thing I had to tell you, no knowledge can be acquired in isolation. One cannot read only one text and only about architecture and architecture. One would become great. In principle, even to become a Vishwakarman, a traditional Sthapati, one has to know so many other things. One has to know about astronomy, astrology, painting, sculpture, music, dance. I mean, there are more than 60 basic necessities. I mean, soil testing, geoinformatics, as astrophysics. There are many more streams a Sapati is supposed to know. One, it is not just about Vedas. They have to be also experts. Obviously, fundamentally, they're supposed to be experts in Vedas, Vedangas, Darshanakara Shastras, Itihasas, Puranas, Dharma Shastra, Niti Shastra, Nyaya Shastra. I mean, they are supposed to be theoretically good in that, and technique-wise, they should also be conversant with animals. It is not just, see, there is a modern tendency to understand that you understand animal by animal or read their behavior, animal behavior. To understand an animal, we should read their behavior. That's a modern assumption. But these people would say you would understand an animal by its animal instinct, not by animal behavior. Because animal behavior would lead you constantly observing them. The moment you have understood the instinct, then you can predict what will happen if the animal is exposed to such an environment. Now, why am I quoting this? You said that, one Shastra with Brahmanical or Kshatriya kind of background. No, there are many other Shastra, even Ashva Shastra or a Gaja Shastra, that is animal related Shastras. It is not anything to do with Brahmanical or Kshatriya kind of. There are people who are other people who take care of it. There are texts related to Tambula Shastras. You might be laughing at it. A Shastra on folding betel leaves. There are Shastras on making jewels. There are Shastras on color, Shastras on fabrics, Shastras on textiles. I mean, so weaving, and there are so many other things. All of them are interdependent on each other. And one takes from the other. Education cannot be done in isolation. A holistic education happens when everything co-hosts with each other. Vishwakarma tradition is one of the strongest tradition which advocates even today co-hosting of other knowledge systems with each other. Thank you for it.
Thank you, sir, for your enthusiastic and enlightening response to all the questions. We learned so much from you today. I would like to invite Principal Professor Alka Thauri ma'am once again to share her views on today's session and to also share concluding remarks for this wonderful 3-day lecture series, Samvad Shrunkala 4. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Avni. Jayachandran sir, I want you to talk to my students about the way sthapatis used to choose a stone to make the idol, or the way they used to, do the sculpting. I want you to take 5 more minutes and talk to them and even my faculty member about that.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah, please.
Actually, the moment they decide that this particular murti has to be done, first of all, site selection itself is a huge process. No temple a temple has to be essentially built on a place where there can be cultivation. Cultivation, a land which is not fit to cultivate, cannot be even considered for a temple construction. There should be a natural presence of organic life in it. Number two, as I was speaking about the measured memory. I told there is a discussion or a kind of a conversation between the heaven and the earth, the danda. An interesting example for a danda is the dana, the rice grain. Because a rice grain, as we call as paddy, a paddy is a standing example of a conversation which has happened between the sky and the earth. When they talk to each other, a paddy is born. When the Dvaya and the Prithvi, they discuss with each other, when they talk to each other, the heavens talk to the earth, the Indra talks to the Bhui, the Vasudha. What is born? There are many vegetations are born, many fauna, flora is born. But why about why they are focusing about paddy, rice, is because that grows into ourselves and we are born out of that. We are Annamaya beings born out of this conversation and the first danda is the paddy grain. When that is the first danda, when we keep 8 measures of the given paddy danda in the given region, it becomes 1 angula of the region. Angula is 8 paddy grains kept to each other horizontally next to each other. So naturally, what is a measure of the given region? It itself is the secretive conversation of the nature in the given region. This is how the nature, the sky and the earth are speaking in that region. And that's how the first manifestation is found in the rice paddy grain. And 8 times of it becomes my first given measure. It's called the angula. Angula is not constant across any place. It differs from place to place. And interestingly, there are people who have predicted that angula might have a link with the ring finger ka diameter of the given people, of the given region. It's called angulika. That's a different subject altogether. But it is so interesting that there might be a connection in this. Having said that, now when this measure is getting multiplied itself into squares, the practical idea is to find an idea called a square. Square is the symbol of earth, while circle is of heaven. Now I'm representing it in terms of square. Square itself is a purusha. It's called it's a cosmos being represented into earth. Any cosmic thing getting represented on earth will be square in shape. That's why we draw in South Indian temples. When we go to certain temples, we have places for Navagrahas. The 9 grahas are worshipped, but they are placed in a square platform. They are not circular. Anything circular on the heavens becomes square on the earth. And here, even when we draw the Kundali, the 12 constellation Rashis ka Kundali, it's drawn in a square platform. Now, even our houses are square in shape. The central angan is square in shape. We allow everything square. Square is a rational representation of the irrational circle through the danda of the rice grain. It's a conversion factor there. Now, I have to host the main Mula Murti, which is nothing but the central part of the cosmic circle. Or there is a divine force which is there. How do I go? How do I do this? I go and find out where he has manifested itself strongly. It has that particular energy he or she has manifested in any vertical beings, anything which is vertically above from the earth. There is something called the idea of Vishwa and the idea of Jagat. Unmanifested, that a base material is called the Vishwa. From there, something is manifested. It is called Jagat. For instance, from the unmanifested cosmos, the galaxy is the Jagat. From the galaxy as Vishwa, the planets are the Jagat. From the Earth or some planet, Earth, if we take that as the Vishwa, the mountains are the Jagat and the rivers are the Jagat. We are the Jagat. And when we take mountain as the Vishwa, the Murti coming out of the mountain rock is the Jagannatha. There's a Vishwanatha and the Jagannatha connection here. One is the one versus the other. Now, interestingly, we have to say, because we know he is manifested there, we have to draw him out. How do we draw him out? We have to meditate on that principle. The Vishwakarmans go into deep meditation. They do dhyana. Through the process of dhyana, the irrational mind, through the energy of the spine, settles into rational. Slowly, the irrational precipitates itself into a rational being. And this happens not by anything, just by mere prayer. You have to pray for the divine to reveal itself. It will not reveal itself the irrational will never become rational so easily. And this mental process happens by one measure called breath. The danda there is the breath. So many breath has happened. So many patterns of breathing has happened. Mind settles for converting irrational to rational. And through this practice, that which is nirvikalpa, which is nirguna, which has no shape, suddenly agrees because of its infinite compassion towards one who is a tapasvi there, because of his yajna, what he is doing in his mind, because of intense heat he is subjecting himself to, the tapas. The word tapa means heat. So much of heat generates when you're constantly focused on something and constantly doing your labor towards it. Because of the compassion, they down manifest into a more understandable form. Now, interesting point here is the image which is descending down is not necessarily a human form. It is human-like form. Because the divine images mostly don't have 8 times of their face to the entire body. They at times have 10 times of their face. Because in normal, if the human measures, then their entire body should be 8 times their face. Not necessarily they'll be 8 times. They will be 10 times. They'll be even at times 12 times their face. Lord Nataraja is 10 times, absolutely, many of the Nataraja images are 10 times their face. That's why you feel most of the images are elongated beings. They are human-like beings. They are not human beings. Human-like features. And there are many interesting things that the age of a Nataraja will be the age of a 16-year-old boy. An age of a Shivakama Sundari or a Devi with Lakshmi, anyone would be not more than 12. The body cannot be muscular. No Shiva image is muscular in ancient sculptures. It cannot be muscular because the maximum age is of 16 of a male icon. Now, when they meditate on that particular dhyana, what they get as a rupa, that particular thing they write as a shloka, it's called dhyana shloka. Based on the dhyana shloka, it's because the dhyana shloka is born out of deep dhyana. And having done this, when they keep meditating on the slab of the rock, now people might also think that there's an interesting thing there, that when the icon is vertical, even the stone is quarried vertically. You can't do a horizontal quarry and make a vertical icon. There's a vertical quarrying and there's a system of horizontal quarrying. They are measured, and there is a stone selection process. When there's a male deity to be done, a male rock has to be selected. When the female deity has to be done, a female rock has to be selected. And when pillars and stones are done, and steps are done, Napumsaka rocks are selected. Rocks have genders. And there is a process to identify the rocks and the gendering. And when the rocks are taken, generally 3 times of their width and 3 times of their height are made so that more than meditate on the slab of rock, the image descends in it. And as and when they're doing it, they only claim that they remove the dirt on top of it so that the Devi can come out. That's only the process of removing, because they're already there. They've already manifested themselves inside. Till that particular point, and I have to tell, in traditional Vishwakarma tradition, there is nothing called modeling. No one models for the images. There is a popular disbelief that most of the dancing sculptures and most of the sculptures in the temples have been modeled. There is nothing called modeling. And before drawing the final drawing, you can, how many ever times, 10,000 times you would have drawn on the mind. But the moment you draw that on the final slab, much of the drawings are free-flowing drawing without any further sketches. You can't, generally in ancient time, there is no resketching. You can't resketch it. A stroke is done, a stroke is done. Till then one can concentrate. Till then one can take so many rehearsals in the mind. But there's only one final performance of putting the stroke. And when that is done, that is how the divine energies are manifested. And it is not by excuse. They generally are excellent strokes. There is no replacement strokes for it. And when the stroke is descended, the rekha is descended, the line is descended, then the irrational is manifested into rational. There is no furthermore speaking. Only now the process of elimination. By the process of elimination, the body is revealed. And finally, There are many interesting micro features. I'm not speaking about it, but when it is installed, there is a process of prana pratishta. The prana is given to the icon and the naina unmilita, the opening of the eye. I mean, they are very sensitive processes, which calls for deeper discussion. Anyway, this is on a broader, truncated version about kshetra, the site selection, the ratio and proportion. I spoke about the danda called the grain, how it becomes angula. From that angula, how a temple becomes. Basically, the temple is nothing but the measurement metrics of the grain. And grain is the secret of discussion between the sky and the earth in that given area. And that is what we are consuming. So when we enter into temple, we are the mobile temple, and that is the immobile, monumented architectural temple. We are in conversation with each other. Both of them come from rice. We are Annamaya body. So this is also by the rice, and that temple is also from the rice. So that is another sharira. We are another sharira entering into the temple. So this is a kind of understanding.
So beautiful, so beautiful. I hope everybody has enjoyed today's talk, because it was a real spiritual thing, a very difficult subject you tried to cover in your talk. Very difficult, thinking about irrational, bringing it to rational, thinking about the idea, and that idea getting manifested into that rhythm also becomes. So probably it was Advait that you were talking about, the singularity of each thing, the time, the space, and the physical form, everything becoming one and manifesting itself into a rational being. It could be human beings, it could be gods, it could be space, it could be architecture also. And one transforming into someone else. A human becoming a temple and getting inside a physically constructed temple. I mean, these are some of the ideas which are inconceivable kind of ideas. When you start thinking, we generally, refer to the Sanskrit line as Sukt as, Aham Brahmasmi. I mean, what do you mean by Aham Brahmasmi? Unless you start feeling that divine within you, you're not Brahma. You are. I mean, one has to go deeper into it. And today's lecture was I have noted down a few sentences that you said. Recording is also there, but yes, lovely sentences like, unless you get into darkness of knowledge. I mean, there cannot be anything much more beautiful than, getting deeper into knowledge, getting into that darkness of knowledge where you're searching for it. And that is, I would say, go deeper within yourself and you start realizing what is knowledge. How do you start searching for that knowledge within you, unless you do deeper meditation? And again, that meditation is nothing but measure your breath.
Yes,
so that's
absolutely.
Also, and then you go on going inside, and you find your own rhythm, you find your own solace, you find your own peace, and that's what brings out I think, the peace in the world also. Another sentence that you said, that architecture itself becomes temple, it is worshipable. uh, I just cannot express the wonderment that I have gone through today. When you say the architecture, I mean, you go into a temple thinking that the deity is there and you have to worship it. But what about the architecture that is keeping the deity in? And that whole thing is, and when I am God and God is in front of me and the whole space is, with God, what else can one seek? And this is why, sometimes I do feel that when we go to all the religions have such places, and religions are nothing but worshipping that supreme energy force. And when you go to any of these places where a lot of people are coming with their positive energy and they are worshipping God, It could be a different god, it could be one god, it could be a number of gods. But when you're totally immersed with the god, the energy that the space gives is so positive, and it kind of energizes you. And
Absolutely.
that's why these places of worship are, I think, the energy hubs of Jagat or Prithvi or
Absolutely.
Vishnu.
Absolutely.
I really loved today's thing. One more sentence that you spoke is education cannot be done in isolation, and that's what we keep talking also. That sometimes I do say that. Uh, when you talk about anything, do you separate the personality of the person from the knowledge? Or do you think they both are one? And if they both are one, do you worship that thing? Do you like that person? Do you like the art or the architecture that the person has created? If the person is not correct, then what do you do? So why don't you have the discussion on that? Keeping people on pedestal and saying they're great. But when you look at the person, he could be a great architect. But what about his persona? Is he great in person also? And that is the time you start seeing that, you know, it has to be one. And unless it is one, you just cannot say that the great architecture was created like this. So there were a lot of things that I have imbibed today, and I'm so grateful for you, Jayachandran sir, for coming on this platform and talking to us. We just cannot give our appreciation for this talk. uh, we just loved it, and uh, we will call you again some days on maybe some other topic. I would like you to talk about. Someday you had said that Garud Stamba in itself is a temple. Today you said my body is Annamai, my body is also a temple, and then you say that the deity is also God. So I'm God. Everything else is God. This philosophy of Sanatan Dharma. Now, Sanatan, I'm not saying it is Hindu only. It is the practiced way of living of this land. Someday we are going to talk about that also, sir. And I would
Sure.
like to invite you again. So, with this, we are coming to end of Samvad Shankala 4. Today, it was a wonderful lecture, and we will be coming back again with Samvad Shankala 5 in the month of December. So, this is what I want to tell to all the people who have joined and they are watching today, that Samvad Shankla 5 will also be maybe curated on something else. Maybe this time we have done spirituality, maybe we'll do something materiality, or maybe we'll talk about something else, because ultimately material is also nothing but spiritual only, unless the material becomes a spiritual. Uh, a very wonderful thing. I just want to take one more minute of yours. Very recently, they have created material out of photons. Now, photons were supposed to be energy. They did not have a mass. What happens when the energy is linked to the mass? Sometime Einstein's theory was, when he was talking uh, about an equation of saying that energy and mass are related by some
Later.
constant. But what if they are interchangeable? The energy itself is mass. These are also some of the other things that we would like to discuss, because architecture is not only limited to uh, building sciences. Ultimately, there are people who are living in architecture, who are using this space. How does it impact? That is what we'll do. So I thank you, sir. I thank you from the family of CTS College of Architecture. We have learned a lot today, and hopefully we will have another conversation with you. Uh, I thank you everyone who has joined us today. Uh, Avani, back to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you
I
so much,
take
ma'am.
immense
Yes, sir.
pleasure in thanking Alka ji for inviting me to be part of on board with CTS family, and such attentive and very beautiful questions. To be very honest, I'm not even exaggerating this. If I've got these questions, then I can understand how earnestly they have heard it. I mean, I thank every one of the people who have put that question, who have heard it, and my reverence to all of you all for your knowledge, for your interest in seeking what I am equally seeking for. Thank you so much for all of your earnest participation in the yajna, because this is like doing a yajna. And you can just be cold and be outside the viewer, then it doesn't happen. Being part of the Gyan Yajna, that helps every one of us. If there is anything which I have not met to the standards, it's entirely my shortcoming. If there's anything great I have said, I had to attribute it to my Acharya Parampara, the Guru Parampara, and the Sahridayas who have heard it today. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you, ma'am. I would now request Professor Dhaval Ghare to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes.
So, good evening, one and all present today at the concluding session of Samvad Shrinkhala 4. On behalf of CTS College of Architecture and the whole fraternity of faculty and students of our organization, I thank the audience and our special invitees for being a part of the fourth season of Samvad. It is my privilege today that I'm able to thank our ever-supportive and dedicated members of the Governing Council for providing us with all the technical facilities that are required to execute such events, even during these trying times. I would like to extend my gratitude and sincere thanks to the esteemed speakers of this season, Architect Savita Raje Sabarwal, Architect Rahul Chemburkar, and Professor S. Jayachandran for preparing such engaging and thought-provoking presentations that kept the audience glued to their screens throughout. Sessions like these cannot be envisaged without the effort of initiation and inspiration. For that, I would like to thank our principal, Professor Alika Tavri, for conceptualizing this and being a constant source of guidance in all the processes involved and in making this event happen. Today, as we celebrate our teamwork and togetherness, I need to thank the people who held the fort and kept working relentlessly to make this event a success. I would like to thank my fellow colleagues, Professor Sunanda Satwa, Professor Pooja Shah, Professor Umesh Malya, and Professor Shweta Parab Ekavde for being an integral part of the organizing team for this event. I thank Professor Sukesha Ghosh, Professor Nisha Kundar, and Professor Avni Sabnis for smooth moderation of the various sessions that were held in this season. And I thank Professor Mrunmay Gauri, Professor Mitali Harmalkar, and Professor Shefali Naik for their support on the same. I would also like to extend my true gratitude towards Professor Tanvi Joshi, Professor Lakshmi Harikumar, Professor Saili Paranspe, and Professor Divya Subramaniam for an excellent job done as backend support. I would like to thank Professor Tanmay Wagle and Professor Shefali Naik for their guidance to the students for curating the posters of this season of Samvad Shrinkhala. A sincere thank you to Professor Anuprita Surve, Professor Harshada Satam, Professor Mitali Hindlekar, Professor Prachi Sharma, Professor Iravati Nath, and our librarian Dheeraj Chogale for their encouragement and support throughout the course of this event. Along with a thank you to the entire faculty team of Samvad Shrinkhala, a special thank you to our administration department, our registrar, Mrs. Supriya Mantri, and the team, Chetna, Vaishali, Aarti, Parshu, Akshay, Dhananjay, and Ibrahim for their active involvement and communication support. Last but not the least, I would now like to thank the organizing team of students, which is the most important link that gives us the confidence to work towards such events. I thank Jaydat Rajadhyaksh, Sasha Rana, Ekta Arolkar, Arav Gupta, Sanskar Jadhav, Jagruti Durgavli, Bhakti Nagwekar, Dishita Kadu, and the entire students team associated with Samvad Shrinkhala for continuing their excellent roles of backend support, media creations, and outreach. Congratulations to the organizing students team for making this event yet another success. With today's session, we conclude the present Shrinkhala, but the Samvad is not over yet. We will be coming up with more Shrinkhalas and Kadis as mentioned by our principal and in the future. So stay tuned for our next season of Samvad Shrinkhala. Thank you for being a part of this season of Samvad Shrinkhala. Have a good evening. Have a great weekend ahead. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.